In the 1990s, a group of animated mutants teamed up to protect a world that hates and fears them. That team is the X-Men, and we're here to celebrate their 30th anniversary and speak with a couple of the series writers as this Geek History lesson on the 1990s X-Men the Animated Series is now in session. Hello and welcome to Geek History Lesson. I am Jason Schnicht Inman.
I am Ashley Victoria Robinson. Welcome to your Mind University, because you have stumbled onto the podcast where we take one character, construct, or from popular culture and teach you everything you need to know about them in about an hour. Shout out to the person on TikTok who told me to stop singing. How's it going, Jason?
What person on TikTok told you to stop singing?
Someone said, girl, you got to stop singing. And I said, pay me to stop singing.
Oh, all right. Okay. We are celebrating today the 30th anniversary of X-Men, also known as X-Men the Animated Series, which debuted on October 31st, 1992 in the United States on the Fox Kids Network. Everyone, even if you do not know, knows some aspect of this show. But I think, weirdly, the thing that most people know is what Ashley just hummed, the theme song. Can we hum it now, right now? All right, that's enough for copyright.
I was like, that's probably about as much.
Yeah, we're gonna get shut down.
Oh, it's an excellent theme song, and I will say there are many excellent covers of it online. One of my favorite was played by Brian Ibbett, previous podcast guest and host of the Coverable podcast. It is like a hard rock metal version of the X-Men theme, and they sound so 90s and so extreme in it.
Oh, okay. And also later in the episode, we're going to chat with Eric Lewald and Julia Lewald. Eric was the showrunner of X-Men the Animated Series, and Julia was one of the series writers. She wrote Whatever It Takes and Days of Future Past Part 1, plus many other episodes. So stay tuned for that interview. It's an amazing, amazing conversation. Let's get into the Tencent origin of the X-Men the Animated Series. Ashley, what's the Tencent origin?
That is the first part of the podcast where Professor Jason is going to tell you all the who's-its and what's-its and accents galore in case you ever go to an X-Men themed cocktail party and someone doesn't know about the animated series.
The series was developed by Eric Lewald, Sydney Awanter, and Mark Edens. I'm going to mispronounce a lot of last names, and I apologize ahead of that. Of course, voices included like Norm Spencer, Cathal J. Dodd, Lenora Zahn, and many others. The theme music was composed by Ron Wasserman, and it had 5 seasons, 76 episodes, and it aired from October 31st, 1992 to September 20th in 1997 on the Fox Kids Network.
They fully said, here, have a Halloween debut. I love that.
Yes. Ashley, let's get to the meet cute.
That is the second part of the podcast where we tell you the first time we meted something and how cute it was.
Ashley, when did you first watch X-Men the Animated Series?
That is a tough question to answer because it is just so cemented in that preschool and early school grade part of my brain. I'm not sure in Canada if we got it later. Like we got Batman the Animated Series later.
You probably did. The Batman Animated Series, X-Men the Animated Series happened at the same time.
But different studios, different agreements.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what network it aired on. But I remember a couple things very distinctly about it. I remember thinking Storm was amazing and so beautiful. I remember Charles Xavier having no accent. Mm-hmm. I remember the voice very, very distinctly. And I remember the design for the Sentinels. I thought the Sentinels were pretty scary. Mm-hmm. I definitely watched a whole slew of episodes growing up, and then I revisited it as an adult and was like, wow, they did actual storylines and they did adaptations. Like you shouted out the Days of Future Past episode, which I think is a really great adaptation of actual storylines. But obviously at the time I was a very young child and had no concept. This was my first introduction to the X-Men.
Nice.
And I think it's the same for a lot of people. But
same with the Batman Animated Series too,
yeah,
I think.
100%. Yeah. How about you?
So everyone, I think I knew about this series from reading comic books. Mm-hmm. I think I saw this advertised in comic books, but
makes sense.
I'm going to go back to the days of when TV didn't come out of a tube that you plugged in the back of your TV, or the days when TV didn't happen through the internet. We had what was called, what the caveman people would use, an antenna.
Oh, bunny ears?
We had bunny ears on top of our television. That's how I got my TV when I grew up. And so I only had I had ABC, CBS, and NBC. Now, X-Men aired on Fox Kids Network. But I will tell you, Ashley, that if we turn the bunny ears just right, and maybe if we put enough tinfoil on top and turned it or touched it, certain Saturday mornings, we were able to get Fox 23 out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I would be able to watch through a lot of haze or a lot of mist.
Yeah.
Until my parents would say, would you just turn the channel? You can't see it. X-Men, the animated series.
You called it haze or mist. We always called that snow.
Yeah, it's static, basically.
That's so funny. We called it snow.
For a long time, that was the only way I was able to watch X-Men or Batman the animated series. I had to wait basically until college. Until videotapes and DVDs and stuff like that. But that's many times through a lot of black and white static is how I watched X-Men the animated series.
Yeah. You wanted it. You earned it.
I did. All right, so let's get into a little bit of the production history, a basic overview of the series, and then we're going to bring these awesome creators on here. So the X-Men the animated series is a show that features X-Men similar in look to the 1990s X-Men, of course, drawn by Jim Lee and many other artists. It's sort of specifically based around the blue team that first appeared in X-Men Volume 2. Now, Ashley, I'm going to ask you, can you name the basic team of X-Men characters on X-Men the animated series? The regular standing cast members. Now,
is there a number
I will give you the number. It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Technically 10.
Technically 10. Okay.
But I will not. The 10th member is not.
Sure.
We'll learn in a second here.
Wolverine.
Correct.
Jubilee.
Correct.
Rogue.
Correct.
Storm.
Correct.
Jean Grey.
Correct.
Cyclops.
Correct.
Beast.
Correct.
Professor X.
Correct.
Did I say Storm already?
You did.
Oh, God. Gambit.
Correct.
Oh.
Okay, so you have the 9.
Okay, can I have a hint at the exception? I mean, is it Magneto?
No, the exception is a character that dies very early on.
Oh, God.
I will say that I have a version.
Do I know who they are?
I have a version of this character, but I have the Age of Apocalypse version of this character in the studio. But this is a character that is not considered to be...
Sabretooth?
No. This is a character that's not really on most X-Men rosters. Just make a guess here, Ashley. This is compelling podcasting.
Alex.
Alex who?
Alex Summers.
Incorrect. It is Morph.
Oh, I would have never got that.
Yeah, it is Morph.
I was just looking at the Morph action figure, though. It's a sick looking action figure.
It's a good looking action figure.
It's a good action figure spotlight.
So this series deals with social issues. Fun fact, X-Men crossed over with the Spider-Man animated series in the 90s as well. The show was critically and commercial success. And a lot of people give credit to X-Men the animated series and Batman the animated series as the two series that successfully launched numerous comic book shows at the 90s.
100%.
Yep.
And there is a direct line between those movies, the movies that popped off like Spider-Man and the Dark Knight trilogy right before the MCU took off, and the generation of creators who are now writers, directors, actors, and executives making these stories today. There is a reason why we have so many X-Men movies.
And also for many weekends on the Saturday morning cartoons, X-Men outperformed Batman the animated series.
Wow.
Actually did better. IGN ranked X-Men as the 13th greatest animated show of all time. And I want to tell you a little bit about the 5 seasons of the show. So the first season is basically about the X-Men fighting the Sentinels.
Yeah.
The second season is considered to be, it's the Cyclops Jean season. That's where they get married.
100%,
And Mr. Sinister is kind of one of the bigger villains of that
Oh my
season.
God, I remember their wedding episode.
The third season focuses on the Phoenix. And then also, of course, I got to tell you a little bit about, there's a story, a two-parter called One Man's Worth. That is an original story to the series. It's about Professor Xavier being killed in the past. That eventually became the inspiration for the crossover Age of Apocalypse.
Oh, interesting.
Directly,
I didn't know that. That's
one of my
cool.
favorite crossovers. It's one of the best episodes of the entire series. Now, it has been revealed that a revival X-Men 97 is going to premiere on Disney Plus in 2023, which will continue the plot of the series. Bo DeMaio is the showrunner of that, and many of the original cast will be appearing in the sequel series. Now, I could keep talking about this show, but why not tell you a little bit more about the creation of the show from the awesome people that made the show. So now I'm just going to warn you that there probably will be minor spoilers for a show that is over 30 years old during this interview, but you should watch this excellent series on Disney Plus. And now it is time to bring in my special guests. All right, this is the GHL interview for X-Men, the animated series. So I want to please welcome to Geek History Lesson the original showrunner of X-Men the Animated Series, Eric Lewald, and the original writer, Julia Lewald. Please welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming along.
Well, thank you so much for having us on. This is a treat.
Yes, we're thrilled to be here.
Well, it's always a treat to talk to some of the creators that have worked on things that are luminary signposts in pop culture. So really quickly, before we dive into the deep of X-Men the Animated Series, I want to ask both of you, who was your favorite X-Men character to write?
To write for on the show?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the nice thing is that each character's voice was so distinct and so specific that, and I don't mean this lightly, they kind of wrote themselves, but because they were so distinct and so specific, it made it a lot easier to write for the show and to write for all of them. Wolverine would never say a Cyclops line, Cyclops would never say a Rogue line, and then,
but your favorite,
but my personal favorite for writing for the show, was Beast. Oh God, that was fun writing for Beast. He was like the
You're very
smartest.
much a Stars and Garters woman. I see that.
He's a damaged poet, and he's among the cast. He's the most intelligent. And Eric, you started very early in the first episode, the idea that as a call to action, Beast would quote some obscure poet or something. And that became kind of a gag among the writers, coming up with the best obscure kind of thing to have Beast say in an episode.
And that was just an absolute self-indulgence. We're polishing up the first story, and all of us involved in the show, writers, artists, executives, had worked on a dozen, quote unquote, boys action shows before this in our lifetimes. And there's calls to action, and I thought, wait a minute, these are a bunch of real adults. And if Beast is going to say something as they leap into action, let it be let it be something more beast-like and not young and silly. And so threw one in, and people responded to it well. And this really wasn't from the books. This was just, again, we something needed to be said as they progressed, and thought we'd toss the line to Beast. And then it grew into this competition among the writers who could find the most obscure quote that was appropriate for the situation.
And this was back before Google. This was back before the interwebs. So
Bartlett's quotations, dusty old books, is where we found those.
All right, so I love it. I like that's the secret sauce of X-Men the Animated Series.
Yeah.
Well, Eric, it's funny, like in all of the interviews and Comic-Con panels that the two of you have done since X-Men the Animated Series has went off the air, it's interesting to see the two of you as sort of this dynamic duo. But Eric, I want to ask you, because you were brought on to develop the show first, but when did you look at your wife, and when did you look at her and be like, I need help. I need another writer that I can trust. Please come help me out with these Merry Mutants.
Wait, you said that to me? that happened? Yeah. Help? No, Eric's perfectly fine on his own. Believe me.
She's trying to remember one of those magic moments. Well, it happened just that. I think it was right away, as you said. We got a call Sunday night at 10 o'clock at night in our bedroom from the Fox executive saying, "Oh, by the way, tomorrow morning you're going to be meeting Stan Lee and Chaim Saban and all these people and you're going to be doing X-Men for them." And just kind of looking at each other, I said, okay, well, there's the next 8 months of our lives minimum. This is going to be a huge deep end to dive into because, as you know from reading the book, it's not something that either one of us were terribly familiar with. We knew the comic book existed, but we hadn't read it. And so it was all hands on deck immediately, and we started a couple months behind. So Julia she was handy.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
And I mean, none of us worked out of offices. We all worked from home. So every time I got started in the morning trying to work on developing the show those first couple of weeks with Mark Edens, by the way, who came over, who was a dear old friend from college and a neighbor and who really co-developed the show from the beginning. It was Mark and I and Julia. I mean, so we were all there. And since she wasn't just, random housewives, she'd had her 5 years of writing the same sort of things and coming and developing shows as well.
We'd met at Disney Afternoon.
Yeah. Met at
Oh,
Disney
really? Wow.
Yeah. In 1988, we met there. And I was working for Tad Stone's on Rescue Rangers, and she was at it. I left for a few months. She took over my desk. So that there was that history. But so it only made sense that it was just all hands on deck. And even though neither she nor Mark were credited as having any sort of the development or co-creation part, they were there for every hour of getting the first season going. And so then that kind of stuck. And she got other work and bore another child in the midst of all this. And so she didn't get as many script assignments as she might have, but she was always there while we were getting the seasons together and while we were deciding on stories. And that's the hardest part of the job. If we could figure out the best 13 stories for a season, after that, it's pretty much just craftsmanship and knowing enough. It's like knowing enough carpenters to build 13 houses. We know enough good writers that, okay, we feel comfortable now that it's good. But figuring out the stories is to us the creative challenge. And she was there with that from the beginning.
Aww.
That's amazing. That's really great. I love this. That we have our own versions of Magneto and Professor X here, and we don't know who is who. This is great. Something that I don't think a lot of our listeners realize is that the market for animated programming in the early 90s was quite different. And can you kind of describe, since you were both veterans of that industry, what was that animation market like before X-Men debuted? And what was it a big risk in adapting a property like X-Men into that market?
So I'm going to go, everyone get in your Wayback Machines and let's go and look back at 1980s, 1990s kids television. And at that time, it didn't matter where you lived in the country. There were three major networks. There was ABC, NBC, CBS, and they ruled Saturday morning kids cartoons. They ruled that block. You had syndication on some local channels, and some of that got national coverage. But if you wanted to sell a show to play on a Saturday, you had to sell it to ABC, NBC, or CBS.
And they all had their certain attitudes about what is and what isn't kids programming. And the producers, it was a fairly small group of people. I remember when I got started in the business early 1985, just before syndication just had opened things up for afternoons. The standard bit at Hanna-Barbera and Ruby Spears and the big producers, just before Disney even got in, was they would pitch shows in January and February to the networks. The networks would decide what 30 shows were going to be on between their three networks. And then you'd write, the writers would write like crazy for 6 months, and then they'd all be laid off, except for maybe 10% would stay back to develop the next season. It was seasonal work. It was so specifically, producing animation for the fall that it wasn't even. Then syndication kicked in where they'd order 65 episodes instead of 13 at a time because they had toy money behind it, and those could kick in any time, like Transformers. And
so Transformers was a syndicated animation show?
Yeah, it was a syndicated, backed by the toy people. I guess it's Hasbro. Okay, here's the money to make. In effect, 65 episodes, you can play that 4 times in a year. That's 13 times 13 weeks, 13 weeks, 13 weeks, 13 weeks. And so 65 was kind of the magic number. And if you had a Saturday morning show, if it was really popular, you'd make sure to do enough seasons so you'd have at least 65 so that you could then syndicate it Monday through Friday. So that syndication kicked in. And so we had this history of making fairly inexpensive, cheap, low budget, tight scheduled things like for Hanna-Barbera and Ruby Spears and the other smaller producers, Filmation. And then then syndication came in, and suddenly there was doubled the amount of work. That's how I got my first job in '85. Was suddenly there was twice the demand for writers, and a friend, a neighbor, was working at Hanna-Barbera and said they're hiring. And then after that, after the late '80s, there was this blitz of action shows, Toy Boy shows, and the thing that X-Men kind of was reacting against was Margaret Lesh had worked in the middle of all that.
And who is she?
She was the president of Fox, and she's the one who decided on X-Men getting on the air. She's the one that had worked for Marvel Productions with Stan Lee. She loved the books. She always wanted to get the show on the air. No one would put it on the air.
Because she was working at Marvel at the time in their productions, and she couldn't sell it to ABC, NBC, CBS.
And so before, earlier, it was kind of they just kind of were churning out shows to fill stuff. They occasionally get shows with some charm, like Madeline or other shows that
they were producing the shows.
Yeah, but in the 70s and 80s, it was pretty much just kind of mass production. Then the toy stuff kicked in, and then it became more like, okay, is this going to be a problem because people are seeing these as 21-minute commercials for Transformer toys? And Margaret she and Sidney Iwander, who was her right-hand man through much of this, yearned to tell more adult, real shows like primetime television, and said that animation could do this. And so as soon as she got hired in 1990 at Fox, she started looking around for higher tone shows to put on there.
And I want to jump in. Fox and Fox Kids was a bold new effort to try and create a fourth major network. It had never been successful, in the U.S.
And so they're trying to get some attention to themselves. So the people above Margaret let her push the envelope with things like X-Men and Batman. Mm-hmm. Before that, it'd simply be either make the cartoon as simply and as inexpensively as you can, to maximize the profit, or make it to advertise a toy. And now they were saying, guys, we want you to write, serious, challenging stories, because look at the base material. X-Men comics are serious, adult, intense. The comics were more intense than the show was.
I didn't know about this because you talk a lot about this in your amazing book previously on X-Men, the making of an animated series. And we're going to have links to that in description and on our website. Yeah. Excellent title, by the way. A great title of the book.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's so amazing that this came from sort of the network, which is something that you don't generally hear, a network giving that note that we want more grounded take. And you describe a lot in the book about how you would always say that this is a show grounded by characters. So I really also want to ask you, with a show being grounded by characters, having this dynamic coming from Fox Studios, what made you choose this initial roster of characters? And was that a difficult choice about who would make your regular cast? And
that's interesting because there were 30 years of X-Men books up until this point. There was a lot of people
that you could have put on there.
Yeah, we looked back and there at a list, and there had been 29 different people that had been X-Men from 1963 on. And so, there was a lot of that was something that was discussed immediately on that first February meeting with all the Marvel people there and the Fox people. There were 4 or 5 groups of people that had an interest in that. Obviously, Marvel wanted to showcase certain characters, either classic ones. Like Wolverine was their most popular character on the planet, so he was a given. They had a couple that they were pushing that were newer, like Gambit was almost brand new, and Cable was brand new.
Bishop,
and then Jubilee was a newer character. So they had interest in that. Fox had an interest Sidney Iwander was the one that was hands-on with us on that. But his was more a creative interest. He didn't care about which Marvel characters got pushed or not. He wanted us to come up with the ones that told the best stories. And that was, so in that initial meeting, it was decided it would be Cyclops, Wolverine, Gambit, Jubilee, Storm. It was about those 5.
Rogue.
And Rogue was in there. So those 6. And beside that, believe it or not, people were just kind of wondering, well, will kids on Saturday morning care that much about Professor X? Beast was a secondary or tertiary character thought. A couple of people that you'd think would be crucial. And Jean Grey said, if you don't use her much, that's fine with us. Do what you're going to do. So we all agreed on about a core of 6. And then Jean asserted herself because, she's from the very beginning. And we all discovered as Mark and I trying to write and Julia looking over our shoulders, try to set up the first season, she really had a relationship with everybody that nobody else had. She could talk to each of the other characters. He was kind of some sort of emotional center for the group of characters. So as we wrote the stories, she was constantly coming up with, okay, she's as much of a lead as Wolverine is. Great. Okay. She established that. And the other one was Beast. We put him in jail in like episode 3 because we thought, okay, well, we won't see him for 4 or 5 episodes because nobody said he needed to be a lead.
In his act of civil disobedience.
Yeah. But he was so different. It's like Spock in Star Trek. He was so different and distinct from the other characters. And we liked him so much. The writers all liked him so much. Everybody kept on pitching him for stories. And by the end of the first season, he had become an absolutely solid lead character, just out of his asserting himself, which is an odd thing to see. If it happens in live action television where they'll have a guest star and he will fit in a special way that no one imagined. And suddenly he becomes a series regular where I think it was Breaking Bad, where Jesse was just supposed to be on for an episode or 2, and he became a co-star. Mm-hmm. And so Beast did that. He asserted himself into the stories. And so by the time, and Morph, of course, was chosen for heroic sacrifice. But there were 2 or 3 characters that asserted themselves and became regulars that hadn't been agreed upon in that first meeting. And they, to their credit, they let us run with it and say, okay, well, this is what we said in meeting 1, but you guys are doing the writing. And if this makes the story stronger, we're happy to let you have a couple more leads. And they let us do it.
Were there any conversations? I know at the time, Jean Grey was named Jean Grey in the comic books, but were there any conversations about, well, she's the only one that doesn't have a code name. Should we give her a code name?
Well, actually, our lead, Will Mineo, who was really the kind of the heart and soul creative lead of all this, who was the first person Margaret Lesh hired to supervise the whole show.
And a brilliant artist. He's on the art side of this thing.
Jean was his favorite character, and he laughingly said, he says, one of the things he liked best about her is that she didn't have a special name. She was just Jean Grey. And why they decided to do that in the original, if you look back at the original comics, it was basically like 4 or 5, 18-year-old American guys in superhero suits and Jean. So kind of like the Smurfette, the afterthought. There weren't a lot of other powerful female characters in the original group. And so I think the early 60s writers just, didn't think of her as a powerful character. And yet we found, when we have the question at cons, who's the most powerful character? And a lot of people have a lot of different reactions. Oh, Rogue, because she's so strong, or Storm, because she can, throw tornadoes at you. A number of people say Jean just because of what she can do with her mind. So she just, again, she's somebody that we just felt ended up being central to this dysfunctional family of people.
At times, I think, has she been called Marvel Girl in early books? Mm-hmm. Right. By the time you got to it, they kind of stopped doing that.
Yeah.
And then it just didn't stick. So I found out something interesting just the other day on Twitter, because I'm on it way too often. But someone had asked online. Anyone know why Jean Grey doesn't have a code name? Why she's not called Marvel Girl? And Larry Houston came on and responded that
Our lead artist.
And he is the one who designed the brilliant opening title sequence. And if you go back and watch it,
iconic.
Among other things.
Yeah.
But one of the things, because it was introducing this whole team of characters, and it was introducing each of them with their names. And he said, in reading the scripts, no one ever calls her Marvel Girl or Marvel. They just call her Jean. And so he put her in as Jean Grey. You've got Storm, you got Wolverine, but she was only Jean Grey because that's all we had called her. And then that was how he was introducing her to the world.
This is an interesting question. We had this discussion with Stan Lee. I liked the variation where different people called people different, people that don't know Magneto will only call him Magneto. Mm-hmm. But Xavier's his friend. He would call him Eric or Magnus. The same thing with Wolverine and Logan. If he's in the middle of a fight, he's Wolverine. If it's a quiet moment with Jean, she'll call him Logan. And Stan didn't like that. He said, no, just call. He liked the cartoon name or the comic names, the fight names.
Nom de guerre.
Yeah,
mm-hmm,
yes.
Mm-hmm.
And he said it can be confusing for the kids. Is this Logan? Is it Wolverine? Who is it? So that for a little while we had a little bit of a back and forth with Stan about that. And luckily it's not like he had some sort of veto power or anything. So it was just we had to listen to his opinion, and as a deference we streamlined that a little bit. But I really like the idea of being able to have somebody have 2 or 3 different ways of being addressed in a story, depending on who's doing the addressing.
Now, Julia, for our listeners that don't know, I want to talk to the staff. We don't want to talk to the showrunner. We want to leave him out of this conversation for real quick.
The one in the trenches here.
Yeah. We want to get to the live action writing, consists of a writer's room. You break apart the season and then you usually outline it and you turn in story docs and all that type of stuff. But could you explain, as a writer on XMen, the animated series, how does the writing process for an episode on your animated show, on XMen, the animated series, go?
It was a very different world. And I don't know if it still continues to be that way. Writers' rooms in animation don't exist in prime time, perhaps. Primetime animation, yeah. But for what this was at the time, the children's animation universe, there was no main office that had a writer's room, like at the Fox Studios. Oh, sorry, and that's me, and I'm turning that off.
That's Fox Studios calling you right now.
It is. They're saying, hey, get the story straight. We want you back. No, so
we're going to call her Marvel Girl now.
What would happen is at the start of, say, a season, like in season 1 or season 2, and because I was there and got to watch, was at the beginning of this, Eric and Mark and me kind of on the fly on the wall would sort of come up with roughly the 13 episode arc for the whole season. And in the first season, that was all you thought you were going to get. There were only 13 episodes. They assumed it was going to flop. So yeah, 13 shots, tell your best stories. Once you and Mark had kind of decided on what those stories were, then you handed each sort of premise out to each writer, who then scurried off to his or her computer and would come up with a beginning, middle, end, and then would come up with an outline. All of this ran through Eric's computer. Everything that was written, he would approve of or not approve of, but so each writer worked directly with Eric in terms of pounding out an individual story. There was only occasionally, like once a year, like season 3 or season 4, would you get a dozen people in a room that you and you would pay for the sandwiches, and people could sort of toss out ideas, but that wasn't how these stories came to happen to be.
Yeah, various people could pitch stories, but the way the stories got approved would be either Mark or I would come up with them, or say writers would pitch them, or producers could pitch them, artists could pitch them, but I would decide which ones I thought could make good stories, and then I would polish it. I would pitch that to the various power people, whether it be Fox or Marvel
A lot of people had to give their thumbs
or even the
up.
production company, Graz Entertainment. If you pitch just so that they know what was being considered, and they might write back and say, "Oh, wait a minute, this, you'll destroy our season's budget if you try to do this episode. If you want to do it, can you simplify it, or please don't do this one, or whatever." In the end, it was Fox's decision what shows got made, which is interesting to think back. Marvel did not have final say on this. There were half a dozen episodes that we did that they really didn't like.
Oh, interesting.
Don't tell anyone.
And
Okay.
they would just, and we would just get back to them and say, it's not usual that we're across, purposes like this. Most of these things we all agree on, but everybody here likes this one. Sorry, you don't. We're going to produce it anyway. So Marvel was thrilled that Fox, in effect, Fox was paying for it. Fox was paying them a fee. It's Fox's show. So if Fox didn't like it, it wasn't going forward. But in the question about writing it, you're right. We've been on panels of people, like say, that work for The Simpsons or work for a live action for a sitcom.
And we worked on live action before, but
Yeah.
yes, go on.
And they have writers' rooms, and it'll be what you think. You'll bring in, you'll write a story, you'll bring it in. There'll be 12 other people punching it up and changing it around. And on panels with writers' places like that, they will say honestly, "Look, I can get credit for a script, and by the time it's been polished up by the staff, there's not a single word in there that I recognize." Whereas the absolute reverse here, these scripts were basically written by the writer. Let's say it was Julia in one of her Days of Future Past, Part 1. It was just what she and I decided to write, period. End of discussion. The people would give us notes, like Fox would say, "Can you trim down the ending?" or "Can you lose this character?" And we would either argue them out of it or do it. So it's not like we didn't have bosses, but 95% of what you see on the screen is what the writer intended in concert with me. So it's basically, they can go and say, "I actually wrote that entire story," and they could recognize every single scene and just about every line of dialogue. There wasn't time, say, for the artists to the voiceover artists. "Oh, let's rethink that scene," because it's being, it's already been storyboarded. They're already sending stuff overseas to prepare for it. So it just went so fast that what the individual writer wrote is what's on screen. It's not the usual primetime stuff, which there's good and bad. There are people that really love the idea of 12 really creative people contributing to a story. I find it kind of frustrating because I've been in a couple of those of writers' rooms, and my experience is that you come to a creative decision, and you can pretty well see early on that there's maybe two ways you can go with it. And if all 9 people have to do, put their 2 cents worth in, you've just spent half an hour. Whereas if it was just a writer and a story editor, the writer could say, "Do you want me to go this way or that way?" And I'd say, "Okay, B. Okay, next." And you've thought it through and you've come up with a good alternative. But it was very, very much the individual writers' stories that ended up in detail on TV.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask another question to both of you: is what led to the decision of, and it seems like this shifted a lot more in season 2, and maybe because you had a season under your belt, of the show leaning towards more 2-parters, a little bit more serialized storytelling. And there's a bit of that in season 1, but like where did that decision come down the line, Eric or Julia, that you both were like, there's too much story for a singular episode?
And just want to point out, here we are 30 years later, telling serialized multi-parters in children's animation was unheard of, at that stage. But Will Mineo was championing, look, comic books themselves don't tell a single story per episode. They might wrap part of one story up, but it keeps going. That's part of the charm of comic books. You want to find out what happens next.
Yeah, and the audience just really loved that. So the first season, what we did is but there's this great pressure on animated television not to do that, because animation, at least back when it was all hand painted as ours was, took so long, took months and months. And you get back an episode, and if episode 3 is disastrous, is not working very well, say take 6 weeks to fix, you can't just sit around waiting and replaying the old episodes.
And you can't play 4 until you've played 3.
Yeah. So 99% of the time, animation producers or networks won't let you do connected stories. They have to be one-offs. And for that very reason. And there was some of that. We had episodes that came back that needed lots of retakes. And there's a reason that we ended up starting the show late, January instead of September, because there were original teething production problems in this very ambitious show. But to answer the question about the writing them connect, all the writers enjoy doing that. There's just so much more you can do if you can build on a show.
Yeah.
I mean, the best, say, hour dramas you can think about, you go from episode 1 through episode 80 of something that builds and builds and builds. Episode 34, something can happen to a character, and you've been built towards that. It's like you're getting to write War and Peace instead of a 5-page short story. And so in that way, the writers love it. It makes for deeper stories. But that first season, Mark and I said, okay, we'll have a beginning where the Sentinels cause this problem. We'll have a little bit of Sentinels in the background, episodes 3 through 11 or 12, and then we'll wrap up the Sentinel problem in number 13, and we'll kind of connect things along the way, but loosely. And so that was, oh my God, all this stuff has to be told in the same direction. The second season, they were burned by the fact that there were production problems and delays, and it cost the money. They said, well, you can't really think of them as being completely connected anymore. Well, said, well, can you give us 2-parters then? And we said, okay, we'll do that. 2-parters we can do, and we can focus on getting a 2-parter done. And as long as there are individual ones after that you could interchange in case one's problematic. So we said, okay, we'll have episode 3 through 11, have them kind of interchangeable, but we'll have this thing in the background, this 50, 60 second bit with Xavier and Magneto in the Savage Lands as a connecting tissue through the second season. And so that was set up so that if episode 4 came back and it wasn't working
in season 2,
yeah, we could play episode 5 in front of it, but with episode 4's, the only thing going in continuation was the Savage Land bit. It's hard to imagine that, but if you look at the individual ones in the middle of that season, they could have been placed out of order. It wouldn't have been a problem. After that, we were given, Marvel wanted to do the 2 Phoenix Saga stories, and those were just huge stories. So they had to be 5 and 4 parts. And that was a real gift. When we were telling you before how hard it is to come up with the 13 stories that will make a season, if you just handed 9 on a platter, they said,
most of the season is done.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't easy work translating that, but it made 9 out of the 13 decisions. Okay, done, checked off. I don't have to sweat about that anymore, and come to a deadline where I don't have a good story.
And you, with the season 2 going into it, everyone sat down and you got all the Savage Land storyline bits, all those those
little bits written and produced before everything else, so they would be ready, and so that could all be shown in order, no matter what production problems were with it. And
there were production problems throughout the season, and things got switched around, but they were able to keep using the Savage Land story as a straight through line.
Yeah.
Now, you said earlier we were talking about the market of animation and cartoons at the time, and they were very inspired by toy lines.
Yeah.
And as your series progressed, Toy Biz released a very extensive line of X-Men action figures, where if you look at them, they're definitely influenced by the comics, but they do seem to follow a lot of the storylines and a lot of the beats of the show the two of you were making. As you were progressing in the series, did the Toy Biz line have any impact on your show? Did you guys have any connection with them? Were there any future meetings, or was it because you had established yourself as the big dog on campus?
Yeah.
They could not touch you.
Yeah, they kind of followed us. We had an interesting Avi Arad, who was with Toy Biz and before he bought into Marvel and became a central part of Marvel. He came on board this whole production as a partner just after we'd finished writing the first season of scripts, before the first season was out. So in 1992, say in the summer, suddenly Marvel now has a partner with toys, although they didn't really have many toys ready because they didn't know this was going to be successful.
Correct.
And so he had was Wolverine phones and walkie-talkies and curtains. And so we got a kind of sheepish call for him because he didn't have any leverage yet. And he said, look, can't you work some of the stuff in? They said, well, you got the Blackbird. We'll if we were planning on 3 2-second shots of the Blackbird during an episode, we can toss you in a couple more, make them a little longer. You think that'll help with sales, but we're not going to give Wolverine curtains or having him talk to a phone that's got his head on it.
Yeah, that is from your book previously on the X-Men, which again, I'm telling all the listeners or podcasts to listen to. That was a story that I read. I cackled that they wanted Wolverine to use a Wolverine walkie-talkie.
Yes.
Yeah. They made them. They were out there.
And they were serious about it. And there was another, it's in the book as well, where Marvel had made some deal, maybe perhaps before the show got started, where there were Australian Happy Meals toys, which involved tricycles that Storm and I think Cyclops and Rogue.
Right over there, actually.
Yeah, that we'd have to feature Storm riding around in the Storm tricycle. and
Magneto as well. And they can levitate and fly. They don't need.
Yeah. And so this is serious. Evidently, there was a reasonably large check paid for this. And so somewhat, Will Mineo just, the production company with our backing just said, look, we won't do this. We'll all walk. And there was a few day period there where we all thought we might get fired over the fact that we wouldn't put the tricycles in. Mm-hmm. And so that did happen. And it's happened on other shows we've worked on where the merchandise people have the leverage and it's simply, you've got to do it. Think about Transformers. If you're writing Transformers, you got to write them to the toys. You can't just, and if, although it's a successful enough one and if your character's deep enough, that's fine. I never minded the shows being commercial because if you write a really good Bugs Bunny cartoon, somebody's going to make toys, and it's just which comes first and which leads. And if you lead with a great show, then the toys will sell. But that sometimes is a hard thing to get across to merchandise people who are having to show that they're influencing your show. But to answer your question, Toy Biz came on just late enough that they never influenced the show at all.
Now, I would be remiss if I did not ask you about the episode titled Nightcrawler, Season 3, Episode 18. Yes. This is a very interesting episode of your series. Takes place after the Giant Phoenix saga. And it's an episode that deals with religious faith and very much even racism to a fact of, but it's also just a very simple story of Wolverine and Nightcrawler. I would like to talk to you about because this again is an episode that would not be a typical Saturday morning cartoon episode. What made you want to try to attempt a story like this? And was it a joy that you were able to place this in the middle of your series?
It was a joy. And give you just a sense of how it came to be. After we'd done a certain number, 30 some, we went and we talked to Marvel and we talked to them about, is there anything you'd like to put into it? Because we were pretty much choosing stories on our own. And they suggested the Phoenix Saga. Okay, that's great. We'll do that. And then they gave us a list of maybe a dozen characters that they'd like to see, guest characters. And Nightcrawler was one of them. Some of the other ones we didn't do, but Nightcrawler. So literally it was, I looked up Nightcrawler because I didn't really know him very well. And the first thing it says in any of the research materials about him was he was devoutly Christian. I said, well, if we're going to introduce him and have a full story about him, let's not tiptoe around that. Let's make that the center of the story. And I brought that to the network. And that was, Julia was telling, we just didn't know if this would go over.
Oh, but we need to mention another person here.
Wonderful person.
Margaret Lesh made all of this happen. And as a president of Fox Kids, we owe her everything. Sydney Iwanter, maybe not so much, but still.
Sydney was great.
Yeah. But the third person here, a woman named Avery Coburn, and she was broadcast standards and practices person at Fox
censor.
Kids. Yeah, the censor. And her word was law. The amazing thing to me, as soon as the show started and you managed to work with her to agree to allow we call it the heroic sacrifice of Morph.
Yeah, to kill one of the leads in the first story.
And she understood what that would mean. So it's not like fake fighting and everything goes back to zero at the end of each episode. I thought, okay, this could be a different kind of series. This could be a different kind of show because people above us got it.
Yeah, and so we went to her, and luckily she knew the books, so she knew about Nightcrawler's background, and she got it. And it was a delicate, we kind of tiptoed a little bit. And the initial story had more action and less personal agonizing over faith in it.
There was like stolen gold.
And a chase on snowmobiles and things. And to his credit, Sydney Iwanter, our immediate executive that gave us all the creative notes, said, no. You said you want to do a show about faith. Let's really do a show about faith. Cut this extraneous stuff out. It's a story between Wolverine and Nightcrawler, so we were let loose to do that, and we chose Wolverine. I and Len Yulee, who's a wonderful writer that wrote the story, dear friend of ours, we've known since Disney, since our first days at Disney. He wrote both Nightcrawler episodes and the XMen episode. Wonderful writer. We sat down and we said, okay, who is it that would be most disturbed or bothered or somehow Nightcrawler's extreme faith would affect the most? If it's Jubilee, she probably hasn't had enough life experience to ponder this more than once. Wolverine's 100 years old. He's probably gained and lost his faith 3 or 4 times. So he's the perfect person to struggle with the presence of this very different person that just came out of nowhere and is smiling as villagers try to kill him and burn, the place down. Who
still has the most forgiving, loving heart, in spite of the fact that he looks like the devil himself, and he is persecuted perpetually just because of how he looks.
Yeah,
and it doesn't make him bitter. It doesn't. That to me also is one of the reasons why I think Beast is the most important character in the team. Everyone else on the team can walk down the street, even Rogue with her hair. But Beast can't walk down the street without everyone going, oh, wow, there's a mutant. Yeah, and the same with Nightcrawler.
Yeah, and we tried to start stories that way. So if we're going to feature somebody, let's make the story about their character, not about their power, or about, make the story about their home struggles or something personal. And all the superpowers and the fun stuff will follow. It's like having shootouts in a Western. If the story is about the shootouts, then it's dull because you've seen it 1,000 times. If it's a unique new character that happens to be put in the middle of a shootout, then your audience is focusing on him and not about the fact that they've seen 1,000 shootouts.
And that episode,
go ahead, Julia.
To me, it's fascinating in rewatching it as we do, the fact that, okay, among all the X-Men team, Gambit, he's from Louisiana, he's from New Orleans. He's got this whole history. You would think, obviously, I would say obviously familiar with the the Catholic religion just because of where he's from. And yet in this episode, he's sitting back eating shrimp going, I don't care. I'm not into this.
He's the cynic heathen. And then, and keeping it small enough. That was one of the challenges with X-Men. If you've got 8 or 9 leads and guest villains, even guest villain teams, and family friends and innocent bystanders, you give these big bloated stories. And so we would sometimes work to just get 2 or 3 of the X-Men off somewhere for an adventure like this. And I think it seemed to work better.
And I also want to make the point that this episode is not proselytizing to people that you need to become a Christian. Instead, it's a really even-handed examination of what faith can mean to someone and how one person can have that, one person doesn't have that, and they can still have a conversation about it. I still can't believe we got to do this, 30 years ago. I doubt you could do that casually today without people flipping out. But I think it's an incredibly important episode.
I agree. It's easily one of my favorite episodes of the entire series, which is why it's the perfect segue to, I would love to know, what were some of your favorite episodes, Julia, of the series that you worked on?
Well, I came up with the kernel of the story that then became the one in season 2, Beauty and the Beast, where Beast falls for a blind gal and helps her recover her sight and is startled and amazed to discover she's falling for him too. And then our talented friend Stephanie Matheson went on to write the script for that. I love that story. I love that here Beast deserves all the happiness in the world, but it deals with the bigotry of her own father, Carly's father, refusing to allow his daughter to be involved with a mutant because he's a dirty mutant. Like the fact that we were able to tell those kinds of stories, racism, bigotry, all these things. Yeah, you got a big blue scientific guy, but it still comes down to racism and hatred and fear of the other. And I love that episode. I love that episode, but I love so many of the episodes too. And I'm going to lead into what I hope Eric says are his favorite episodes.
Yeah. We've in going back and doing the books, I was having to watch everything again. And, luckily, most of them still make us very happy. There are a few that we wish we could have back that aren't so sharp. But the one that in trying to think about what are the best stories you could tell about the X-Men, there was just a moment of clarity. Again, one night up in the bedroom, falling asleep, is wait a minute, we could do what would be the best story about the X-Men possible. What if someone went back in time and did something that made it so that the X-Men never existed? How would that affect the world? So we're stealing directly from City on the Edge of Forever from Star Trek and It's a Wonderful Life from the movies.
I say homage, but he's got a point.
Right. So creative theft here, and say, okay, Xavier's got to be the one. Okay, so next morning, call up and to the people at Fox. What about this idea of if a young Xavier is killed by a time traveler, and that means the X-Men never have existed, and the world is now a horrifying dystopia. And just to show the audience what the lack of one person. And so it's called One Man's Worth, and it's a 2-parter in season 4.
Mm-hmm. Richard Muller and
Richard Muller actually wrote the 2-part outline, and then there was another gentleman who name escapes me that wrote the script for part 2. But Richard Muller did and it really was satisfying. It's one of those things we were talking about how hard it is to come up with the best stories. That one I just knew in a split second, this could be a great story for the X-Men.
And if I can share in here. So Eric's the one the idea for what became One Man's Worth, and the idea of the loss of Xavier and how the world turns into a hellish hellscape. The episode that's so close to my heart, just because in the hellish hellscape, Storm and Logan have found each other and are happily married and together in the hellscape. And it comes down to, are they willing to sacrifice their love for the sake of the entire planet? That kills me, because after having written on the show for 4 years, of course they should be together. Why didn't we think of that sooner? But you had that. This story came up when Bob Harris, the point man for Marvel, was here in Los Angeles, and you were talking about ideas.
And he loved it and ran with it, and then he built something 100 times larger. It was the kernel of an idea for him to try to set up Age of Apocalypse.
I know. Yeah, it's funny in your introduction, I gave a shout out to that because the Age of the Apocalypse is one of my favorite crossovers. And then I later found out that I was like, oh, it's aping what you did. Oh, hey,
And
it took me years to figure out that they were connected.
Well, and the timeline is tough because when you first pitch the idea, typically the train leaves the station and you get a script out fast. And this was not the case.
We rewrote on One Man's Worth. The time travel stories drive people crazy with their logic. But the point was, we worked on this long enough and rewrote and redrew it long enough that Bob was able to start getting some art started for Age of Apocalypse over at Marvel before we finished producing this One Man's Worth animated show. So Larry Houston was able to use a few designs from the ongoing development at Marvel for Age of Apocalypse. So it's like in tandem. We came up with the idea. We built a wonderful story on it. They grabbed it. They ran with it. And over the course of a year, there was bleeding back and forth. And it was so nice to give back. So many good kernels of stuff we took, especially from Chris Claremont's stories, that we used in our stories.
I mean, it's X-Men. We wouldn't be here without X-Men.
It was nice to be able to come up with something that made them excited and they were able to use in the comic books.
Was there ever any talk in the 90s at the height of your series of the two of you writing any of the in-continuity X-Men books at Marvel? Because I know they had X-Men Adventures for a while, but to
we
me,
weren't even tapped on that. No one. Yeah, we weren't. Yeah,
it seems like an easy pick that I would just say, hey, in between the seasons, you maybe want to do an arc on X-Men Adventures.
That's a very good idea.
Yeah. We certainly would have liked to try. I think there's also the case that it's a different craft and not one that I think there's a good chance if you gave me enough time to fail a couple times that I could write a good comic book. But there are people that are really good at writing for the comic book form that may not be that good writing for animation and vice versa. So it's not just a given. Len Wein came and did both. He came out
and created Wolverine.
Yes, and Nightcrawler and all the characters we love in comic books.
There have been other comic book writers that have come out and tried to write an animation. They just don't make the transition. And so, much as I love to be arrogant about my own creative abilities, I'm not sure that if Marvel given us that opportunity, that we would have done as well writing a comic book as just a kind of run-of-the-mill staff writer at Marvel, just because he knows the form so well, or she knows the form so well, and we really didn't.
Although I'll say at the time, all the comic book writing was taking place in New York, and we were out in Los Angeles, and there
was no internet.
There was no internet.
Yeah.
And you brought up X-Men Adventures. No one called us, and those. There was literally no connection. And I wish there had been. It probably would have been really helpful if we were all in the same town and we all knew each other. There could have been more fertile back and forth.
It's also something of very much at the time period. Like I think if you two were making X-Men the animated series now, you would definitely write some tie-in miniseries over at Marvel. I think that would be a given.
Yeah, and they were struggling financially. They were just trying to keep their heads above water. They went bankrupt. It was not an easy time for them. And we were kind of writing this as fast as we possibly could because budgets were tight. And looking back, it was a very ambitious show for the budget and schedule we were given. And so everybody here was just kind of in emergency mode. And now we have we've got the time to look back and think what of the fun stuff we might have done. But we were just trying to make our deadlines and get through this thing and hope that it all held together in the end.
And we never could have imagined that 30 years later, we'd be talking about it like this.
Yeah.
It's astonishing to me.
Well, let's.
I mean,
talk
it
about
means
that.
so much to me.
You've continued to write X-Men because you've both written two amazing behind the scenes books. One previously on X-Men, the making of an animated series, and then there's an art book that was more recently came out, X-Men, the art and the making of the animated series. And I want to say, like, what led the two of you to want to write more about your time on the X-Men?
I'll take the credit or the blame on this, just because back in 2015, 2015, I became aware of the fact that we were coming up on like a 20th or a 25th anniversary of the X-Men show, in the same way that Batman was coming up on a big anniversary. And no one was making any kind of effort to celebrate X-Men. I mean, there was no studio. The
rights were split.
The rights were just shot all across the. Anyway, couldn't get arrested. And I poked Eric. I said, look, we have the scripts, we have the storyboards. You can reach out to most of the people. If you don't write about what it took to make X-Men the animated series, it's going to, that history is going to go away because no one else knows it like you do. And you can reach out to the folks and make that book. And that also became our entree into going to more cons. We had not really been going to cons before because as writers, it's not like we can draw you a quick sketch, or as a voice talent, we didn't have anything to take to cons to share with people. And then you did what I consider the definitive oral history. You've got interviews in here with Norm Spencer, with Len Wein, people who are no longer with us that you were able to talk to. You wrote it. We found a small publishing house because Marvel didn't return your phone calls. No one was interested. The rights were too split. There was no one company that was keen on this. But so the book came out. I'm very proud of you and this book. I'm so pleased that this exists. But then an email came.
Yeah, and it was.
What was the email? Positive email or a negative email?
Well, we didn't know as we opened it up. All we knew is from some big high-level guy at Marvel, president of international licensing.
There you go. That's what got my attention.
And we thought, oh, damn, we've been caught out using too much. Too much material in fair use without their permission. And we called guys said, no. Everybody here at the office loves your book. He's just called to let us know that early on that the rights problems with Fox and a couple other people have been resolved.
Or would be resolved soon.
We're in the process of being resolved. And that the rights would all be back together. And that now Marvel could actually do a project with us, could do a book with us. And since we've done an exhaustive history, now let's do something with the art.
Oh.
And we can get you all this, wonderful, beautiful art and have the rights to it all and
support you
and do a coffee table book. And we thought, oh, great. So that was the first book, got us the second book. And
the second book, suddenly we're not artists. It's like, oh, yay, an art book. Oh, now what do we do?
Yeah, because we had to call up people and dig around in people's basements to find cells. Because even though there had been millions of them painted, there may be a couple thousand still in existence around the planet.
They degrade.
Yeah,
they degrade. They were tossed out. It was just
people just threw them out. So luckily there was a good Van Eaton Galleries had a couple hundred.
Yeah, here in Los Angeles.
Yeah, that collectors would buy from, and so we used some of them. And various artists had kept stuff the way we kept scripts. They kept model designs and detailed stuff from the production side of things. And
we were grateful they scanned a lot of that stuff because none of this was on computer, but they had done it themselves. So we had resources we didn't think we'd have.
We laughingly explain to people when we wrote this. It was pre-Windows. It was Microsoft. It was Microsoft Word for DOS.
Boy!
It was that long ago.
Was that with a black and green monitor?
Yes.
Oh, okay. God.
Yeah, or an orange, black and orange monitor on the plasma, 17-pound plasma laptop.
Oh my God! But that's what then got us. It was me wanting us to celebrate X-Men that got you to do the first book, and what astonished us is how, when we got to start going to cons, the number of people at the cons who are crazed X-Men fans.
Yeah.
It was so gratifying.
We just were blown away by the sheer volume. It was so popular in the US where half of America's TVs would be on it on Saturday morning.
Yeah.
And it was similarly popular around the world. And we discovered this in writing the books and talking to people online that all over the planet, they're X-Men animation, the animated series fans that now watch it with their children and have kept up the interest. And when we go to cons, we're stunned to discover that more than just about any other pop culture entity, Star Wars or the movies or any other Marvel characters, the principal people we see in cosplay are cosplaying X-Men the animated series.
Yeah.
Which is, again, it's jaw-dropping to us that it has resonated and remained resonant for people, 30 years later.
Oh, and we haven't got the details yet, but we found out this week also, thank you, Twitter, that the art book has just come out with a translation into Spanish. And there is now a fully texted Spanish language version of the art and making of the animated series.
Wow, that's amazing.
We hadn't seen, we didn't know that was coming, and it's just delightful that they have enough faith or this is doing well enough.
So I'm glad to hear that the book is positively received. It's a great book. It's a beautiful book. And for my final question for the both of you, I want to ask you, we are here 30 years later. We're celebrating the anniversary of X-Men, the animated series. And I do believe that there is a before and after of X-Men, the animated series. But I wanted to ask the two of you, people that have worked and molded and created this luminary animated series, what do you think is the legacy of X-Men, the animated series?
I'll try and make it a short answer, but it in the same way, I grew up in Texas, and the thing that I found that I hooked onto as like a lifeline was the reruns of the original Star Trek series on our local UHF channel when I was younger. Like, oh my God, this is a world I hadn't dreamed of, and they get me. The Star Trek world gets me, and that I've clung to that my whole life. And then coming out to LA and then meeting Eric and discovering he himself is a huge Star Trek fan. We used to sort of tease each other when we were first starting to see each other. Oh, you think you know Star Trek? And again, back before you could look stuff up on Google, you had to know the stuff cold. And here we are, and Star Trek is beyond what it's its own thing, but it brings people together in remarkable ways. And I like to think X-Men, I like to think X-Men, the animated series, introduced a lot of people to a certain kind of storytelling. The fact that you could tell a serialized story, that you could tell stories about dark, heavy, sad things and introduce those to people and yet not destroy the people. That there are a lot of folks out there who said it helped them when they had to deal with things like a grief or, a profound sadness, or even in bigotry or racism. The show talked about a lot of stuff, but never called it that, never called it out. And I think the fact that people were able to see these stories and understand from these stories those bits of wisdom they needed to take with them, I think that's huge.
Yeah. I think so much of popular culture, especially kid-focused popular culture, is written down and is not serious human stories. And I think, I think we brought that to tell about the TV animation in a way that really hadn't been. I mean, they kind of get that in Japan with a lot of their anime, but I think when we see people, they take a lot of their lives seriously, even when they're little kids. They don't want, they might have a little fun if a show is silly or goofy or winking at the screen. But I think there's something about, if you're dead serious about these people, no matter what they look like, no matter running around in these silly costumes and have strange inhuman powers or whatever the larger than life material is in this, you're telling stories about, serious human stories about people's loss and love and caring about each other, then I think it grabs folks in a way that shows that don't take it as seriously. Don't. I mean, the movies that followed this took these characters seriously and were successful. And it's just, I think it certainly has stunned Hollywood that, oh, you mean they want to see these guys be dead? Because we used to get all sorts of notes about make it sillier, make it younger, make it funnier, just,
can you add a dog?
Yeah, can you add a dog?
Can you add an X-Men dog? Wow.
Yeah, can you wink at the screen? And I think the thing that grabs people about the best comics and the best animated adventure shows is the fact when characters take things seriously, because the audience, it's like you're respecting the audience then. And the audience can see themselves in these characters. And I think that helped allow Hollywood treat what they thought of as kind of a geek culture that was a little subhuman to them as being serious human culture, and allowed them to take it more seriously. And now they're like $100 billion ahead. They've benefited from the fact that, oh yeah, there's this whole world out there that wants to see these stories told straight.
And I think too, one last bit, because we hear it so often from folks when we get to meet them, that the X-Men team became a found family. Everyone on the team, every member was shunned or rejected in some way and found their way to the Xavier School with Professor Xavier and became, as I said, this found family. I think that provided a lot of comfort for a lot of kids who among us doesn't grow up feeling like we're different, like we're weird. I think that's a universal. But the fact that you'd see them fight, you'd see them come together, you'd see them be mad at each other, you'd see them get over it. I think that, and you see them coming together to try and embody Xavier's efforts to work with the world and figure out how to live peacefully with someone who is different from you. I think that's a nice story.
I think the both of you, mad respect from me to the both of you for your work and for this amazing animated series. And happy anniversary, X-Men, the animated series.
Yes, thank you, 30.
And Eric and Julia, please let our listeners know where they can find you online. And if you have any other really cool or interesting projects coming up down the pipeline.
Well, I am on Twitter way too much. We are at X-Men TAS, which for me is X-Men, the animated series. That's our Twitter account. That's our Instagram. That's our Facebook page. And we have a website. We're trying to get it spoofed up so we can start doing more with the sales of the books. We have links there as well as in the profiles on our different social media where you can get the books through Amazon. We're trying to set it up so you can buy them from us and we can autograph them for you. Haven't got that figured out yet completely, but we're working on it. And just because it was a tremendous honor to be asked back to the party, we will be serving along with Larry Houston as consulting producers on the new Disney X-Men 97 that's coming out next year.
That is fantastic. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Everyone involved in that show loves the X-Men and they love the original series.
I purposely avoided any questions about that because I felt I was like, the two of you, if you were involved, would be under such huge NDAs. But so that is lovely. That is so amazing to hear that you're involved.
Serious NDAs.
Serious NDAs. But we can tell you that we're there. That's what we can tell you. And that's it. That's it.
And that we very much like and respect the ocean of 30-something X-Men fans that are making this show, and that it is a continuation of our show, not a different show or a reboot or a spinoff.
Wow, I know, it's amazing to me. So hey, you have time now between now and next year to start rewatching X-Men the animated series, so you'll be ready to jump right in.
And they have plenty of time to pick up 2 amazing books. So amazing. Eric and Julia, thank you so much for joining me on this week's Geek History Lesson.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
And it was amazing talking to them, and I hope everybody go check out their books. That's what the recommended reading is this week.
100%.
Actually, where can they find our recommended reading?
You can find that at geekhistorylesson.com/recommended reading. And if you want to have your mind continually blown by such amazing creators, go and check out everything that we have there in any format that you like.
So there will be their 2 books. Eric and Julie wrote Previously on the X-Men, The Making of an Animated Series. It's a prose book. It's really great. I've read it. It gets in depth on every single episode of the series and tells you about the creation, the writing, all the production stuff. They also have, you want to see more pictures in your X-Men behind the scenes, they also have X-Men, the art and the making of the animated series, which they talked about in the interview. They just released it. Beautiful art. Both books available. We have links to both those books. Go check them out. And also, everybody, don't forget to subscribe and download this podcast everywhere you listen to podcasts, on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Ashley, where can they find Geek History Lesson on social media?
You can do that at geekhistorylesson.com. You put a /blog on the end. You get a new post every Thursday. You can also do that at facebook.com/geekhistorylesson, on Twitter at GHL Podcast, and on Instagram at Geek History Lesson.
And over on the Patreon, patreon.com/Jawiin, that's Jawiin. We're going to have a GHL Extra this week that you can only listen to over there, where we're going to be talking about our favorite episodes of X-Men, the animated series. Lastly, we're just got to get around to...
Stick around.
Ashley.
Yes.
Who is your favorite animated X-Men member?
It's hard as a young girl to not say Jubilee.
Oh, interesting. Because I know you're not a big Jubilee comic book fan.
I'm not. And I kind of like Rogue. Like, I thought Rogue was kind of cool when I was like 10, 11, 12. And my interest in that character has dropped off completely since then.
I'm going to say this. I think the best versions of Rogue and Jubilee are in X-Men the Animated Series.
Yeah, I'm really partial to the Rogue from X-Men Evolution because she's kind of gothy.
Oh, that's fair. And
she's kind of witchy.
And I know X-Men Evolution was more it's like the show you grew up with.
Yeah, I was a little bit older, so like I imprinted on it just a little bit harder. But I thought Jubilee was cool. I really liked Storm. Storm was always my favorite when I watched the X-Men, and then like Wolverine, but it's because Wolverine just has like a cool factor that no one else does.
That's
and
fair.
also, the Wolverine from X-Men the Animated Series in particular has become memified.
Yes.
So I think through the lens
famous
of
Jean picture.
Yeah, through the lens of nostalgia, I also love that particular version just a little bit more.
Mine is the Beast.
Yeah, really.
Yeah,
him hanging upside down with the lab coat, reading stuff.
He's just so entertaining. He's so funny. He's so good. Like he's just I think he is like the best cast member.
I mean, I would argue that to this day he is the definitive depiction of Beast.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Sorry, Nicholas Hoult.
Well, you know, yeah, he's listening. He's fine.
Yeah, Nicholas Holt's doing just fine.
Yeah. Nikki, hey, Nikki boy, you're fine. You're fine, Nikki boy.
I just mean no disrespect. I still think the Beast from X-Men the Animated Series is the best adaptation.
Yeah. Definitely. Of the Beast.
Yeah, of the Beast.
Much better than Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Prince Adam, he's going to have something to say about that.
Well, 100%. All right. Well, everybody, go watch you some X-Men the Animated Series. Go read you some X-Men the Animated Series books. And thank you for joining us on our animated episode. I am Jason, cell-shaded Inman.
I am Ashley Victoria Robinson. And Professor Jason, would you please dismiss the class?
Class is dismissed, bub.